Two police officers thought they could rough up the wrong man and walk away. They were wrong and learned it the hard way. It all started on a Monday night in Maplewood, Texas, a dry, heavy night where the pavement seemed to hold its breath. Outside Sammy's Quick Mart, Samuel Hayes, a 36-year-old nurse who had just finished a 12-hour shift at Shepherd Medical Center, was fumbling for his car door while holding a bag of groceries. His feet ached, and he was eager to kick off his sneakers and enjoy some leftover barbecue. Suddenly he heard the screech of tires and the sound of doors flying open. Two police officers, one stocky with a red buzz cut and the other lanky with a mustache, charged toward him. "Hey, drop the bag now," barked Officer Davis. Samuel, still holding the bag, turned around, confused. "I just came out the store, man. What's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Davis slapped the bag out of his hand, and the Gatorade spilled onto the street. "You match the description," Davis snapped. "Put your hands behind your back." Officer Riley grabbed Samuel's wrist and twisted it behind his back. People nearby started to watch, some recording on their phones. Samuel, handcuffed and confused, said, "I work at the hospital. I'm a nurse." But Davis sneered, "Yeah, and I'm the King of England." Samuel, understanding the dangers of escalating the situation, stayed calm, thinking about his mother's advice: keep your dignity no matter what. The ride to the station was long, despite its short distance. In the back of the squad car, Samuel sat in silence, his wrists raw from the cuffs. The officers in front laughed about a basketball game on the radio, ignoring him completely. At the Maplewood Police Department, Davis roughly pulled Samuel out of the car and escorted him into the station. The front desk clerk eyed him suspiciously but said nothing. "Booking for shoplifting suspect," Officer Riley said, slapping a clipboard onto the counter. Samuel was tossed into a cold, windowless room with concrete walls and a steel bench. No rights were read, no phone call made, and no paperwork was shown. Samuel sat silently, waiting in the empty room for hours. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a detective or lawyer, it was Officer Davis with a manila folder, signaling that Samuel's ordeal was far from over. Officer Davis opened the folder dramatically and casually said, "Turns out you're not our guy." Samuel stayed seated, his fingers tightening into fists in his lap. "You fit the description, though," Davis added nonchalantly. "Dark hoodie, dark pants, male, black." There it was. No apology, no regret, just a shrug and a half smirk. "You're free to go," Davis said, tossing the folder onto the bench like it was a favor. Samuel stood slowly, his knees cracking from sitting so long. He walked past them silently, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had plans. As he pushed through the station doors into the cool night air, he didn't feel free. He felt like a soda can shaken and tossed aside, dented on the outside, ready to explode inside. But Samuel wasn't the type to explode. He was the type to move in silence. And that silence was about to get loud. That night, Samuel sat alone at his kitchen table. The only light came from the weak glow of the stove hood. His phone buzzed every few minutes with texts from friends, co-workers, even strangers. Someone had posted a video of the arrest online, and it was spreading fast. The comments stung worse than the bruises on his wrists. Another one: "Man was just buying Gatorade. These clowns don't even try to hide it anymore." Samuel scrolled through the messages, but it didn't make him feel any better. It made him feel smaller, angrier, and tired. He thought about letting it go. He thought about showing up at work the next day, laughing it off, pretending it didn't matter. But then he looked at the photo above his kitchen counter, his father, Reverend Lionel Hayes, standing proud in his army uniform from 25 years ago. A man who had survived war zones and segregation, and still taught his son one simple rule: never let anyone steal your dignity. Samuel straightened up. He opened his closet and reached past the winter coats and hospital scrubs. There it was. His own army uniform, polished shoes, sharp creases, medals from deployments in Afghanistan, humanitarian missions in Haiti, disaster relief in Louisiana. He hadn't worn it in years, not since switching to nursing. He ran his hand over the ribbons, a reminder that he wasn't just a nurse or some guy at a convenience store. He was a soldier, a veteran, a protector. By midnight, Samuel had a plan. He wasn't going to scream into the void online. He wasn't going to post angry videos or beg for sympathy. He was going to walk straight into the lion's den and make them see him for who he really was. The next day, he gathered everything he needed: statements from the bystanders, screenshots of the viral video, a formal complaint letter, tight and professional, no swearing, no typos. And one more thing, he called an old army buddy who worked as a legal advisor for military personnel. They agreed to meet him at the station. By the time Samuel zipped up his uniform the next morning, something inside him had shifted. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared. He was ready. What he didn't know yet, as he straightened his tie and laced up his polished shoes, was just how badly the two officers had messed up their futures. The station looked different in the daylight, less like a fortress and more like a tired old building, trying too hard to look important. Samuel pulled into the parking lot right at 9 sharp, stepping out of his car slowly and deliberately. The sun caught the metals on his chest: silver, gold, bronze, small flashes of a life most people couldn't even imagine. Across the lot, people paused. Officers on smoke breaks lowered their coffees. A rookie, no older than 23, nudged his partner and whispered something under his breath. Samuel didn't rush. He smoothed his sleeves, adjusted the brim of his army cap, and walked straight through the double doors. His boots echoed sharply against the tile floor. Behind the glass of the front desk, the same older woman from 2 nights ago blinked up at him. For a second, her mouth opened, as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just buzzed him through. Inside, the air was different, thicker, heavier. At the center of the main room, sitting with coffee and paperwork, were Officers Davis and Riley. Samuel stopped 10 feet from them. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to file an official complaint regarding an incident involving your officers." He could see it, the slow turn of Davis's head, the double take, the way Riley shifted in his seat. The color drained from their faces. Recognition hit them like a truck. Riley muttered something under his breath. Davis's hand instinctively went to his belt like he was searching for something to ground him. "Sir," the front desk clerk called gently from behind him. "The watch commander will see you now." Samuel nodded once sharply and followed her down the hallway. Waiting for him inside the office was Captain Michelle Anderson, late 50s, salt and pepper hair, a no-nonsense posture. And next to her, leaning casually against the wall, was Captain Robert Clark, his Army JAG badge clipped neatly to his belt. They stood as Samuel entered. Captain Anderson's eyes lingered on the rows of ribbons and medals across Samuel's chest. There was a pause, a moment where the weight of what had happened seemed to fill every corner of that room. "Mr. Hayes," she said finally, her voice low. "Thank you for coming in." Samuel laid the complaint packet on the table, tight, professional. No yelling, no begging, just facts, witness accounts, video evidence, proof of wrongful detention, proof of physical injury, proof of humiliation without cause. Captain Clark added 2 sheets of paper to the pile: a formal notice requesting an internal investigation and an advisory notice for the Department of Defense to be informed of the mistreatment of military personnel. Anderson's face tightened. "You understand this is serious," she said. "I understand exactly how serious," Samuel answered, locking eyes with her. A beat passed, then another. Outside the glass window, Davis and Riley shifted uncomfortably. They could see everything happening, but they couldn't stop it. Captain Anderson nodded once, sharp and professional. "We'll be initiating an immediate review," she said. "And pending the investigation, both officers will be placed on administrative leave." Samuel didn't smile. He didn't pump his fist or shout or gloat. He just collected his copies of the paperwork, tucked them under his arm, and turned to leave. As he passed back through the lobby, he caught one last glimpse of Davis and Riley. 2 men who thought they were untouchable. 2 men who laughed at him, roughed him up, tossed him aside like garbage, now sitting pale and silent under the very weight they had built for others. But the real storm wasn't just coming for them. It was already here, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. By Monday morning, the city of Maplewood was buzzing, and not in a good way. The video of Samuel's arrest had exploded. Local news anchors were running segments every hour. Headlines shouted from every screen: "Nurse and Army veteran wrongfully arrested by Maplewood PD, caught on camera. Humiliation without cause." Even national outlets were picking it up now. By noon, the mayor's office released a stiff statement promising a thorough and impartial investigation. At the station, Davis and Riley weren't sitting so tall anymore. They showed up for their shifts, looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. Whispers followed them down the halls. Officers who had once laughed at their jokes now avoided eye contact. Then came the official notices, administrative leave effective immediately, an internal affairs investigation launched, and a civil rights attorney retained by Samuel's legal team. Riley tried to play it off, shrugging to a few colleagues that it was all a big misunderstanding, but nobody was buying it. Davis stayed quiet, his face tight, his fists buried deep in his jacket pockets. Samuel didn't need to yell or storm the station or stage a protest. He had done something more devastating. He had let the truth do all the talking. Meanwhile, Samuel's life flipped upside down in a different way. He was flooded with messages of support from nurses, soldiers, neighbors, and even strangers from across the country. Thank you for standing up. You make us proud. We're with you. It wasn't just sympathy, it was solidarity. One afternoon, while Samuel was grabbing coffee at a small spot called the Grindhouse downtown, an older man in a Vietnam veteran hat tapped him on the shoulder. You didn't just fight for yourself, the man said, his voice gravelly but strong. You fought for every one of us who's ever been treated like we don't matter. Samuel nodded quietly, emotion catching in his throat. Sometimes the loudest victories are the ones nobody sees on TV. Over the next few weeks, both Davis and Riley faced official disciplinary hearings. Reports leaked that several past complaints, once buried or ignored, had resurfaced thanks to the investigation. It turned out Samuel wasn't the first innocent person they'd cornered. He was just the first one they couldn't bury. Within 2 months, both officers were suspended without pay. Internal recommendations were made for termination, and quietly away from the cameras, civil lawsuits were brewing, not just from Samuel, but from others who finally felt brave enough to come forward. As for Samuel, he didn't disappear or hide. He went back to work at Shepherd Medical Center, kept saving lives, and kept showing up for people. Only now, when he walked through the hospital, people didn't just see a nurse. They saw a man who had faced the worst and stood taller because of it. But for Samuel, this victory wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding everyone watching that dignity isn't given, it's defended. The news cycle eventually moved on like it always does, new scandals, new headlines, new distractions. But in Maplewood, the memory of what happened to Samuel Hayes didn't just fade away. It left a mark. It sparked changes inside the police department, new sensitivity training, mandatory body cams turned on at all times, stricter accountability measures. Small steps, late steps, but steps forward all the same. Samuel never once showed up to brag or gloat. He didn't stand outside the courthouse with a microphone. He didn't shout anyone down. Instead, he quietly met with local high school students during a Veterans Day event. He spoke to them about service, about standing up without violence, about the strength it takes to stay calm when the world wants you to lose control. He told them the truth that injustice is real, and dignity isn't something you beg for. It's something you defend every day with how you carry yourself, even when no one's looking. And the kids listened, really listened, because Samuel wasn't a headline or a viral video. He was a real man standing right there, breathing the same air, wearing a uniform that meant something. Weeks later, Samuel received a letter from the mayor's office, an official apology on behalf of the city, and another from the Department of Defense, thanking him for his service and continued embodiment of American values, both in and out of uniform. He framed neither. They stayed tucked in a drawer under his bed because for Samuel, the real reward wasn't paperwork or payouts. It was knowing that somewhere someone had watched how he handled it all and decided to stand a little taller the next time they were tested. He knew he couldn't fix everything. Racism wasn't new. Abuse of power wasn't new. And the fight for fairness wasn't going to end just because he wore a nice uniform one day. But he also knew this: change doesn't happen in tidal waves. It happens one small moment at a time. One decision to stay calm. One refusal to be broken. One step forward when everything in you wants to sit down. A week had passed since Samuel Hayes walked into that police station and handed over the truth. The world had moved on. But in Maplewood, the ripples of that one moment still hadn't settled. Samuel had done what many only talked about, and while the headlines shifted, his story stuck with people. The weight of the quiet strength he showed that night lingered, and the small town began to feel it. The officers who once wore their arrogance like armor were now shadows of who they used to be. Davis and Riley were still on administrative leave, the slow grind of internal investigations weighing on them. Samuel hadn't just changed the course of their careers, he had changed the way people looked at power. In the weeks following, more stories surfaced of other small injustices, each one a whisper of the quiet revolution that Samuel had sparked. His refusal to be broken had ignited something in others. But as the town moved through its daily routine, Samuel still found himself standing at the crossroads of history and personal truth. He had become a symbol, but he wasn't comfortable with the spotlight. He didn't seek accolades. His quiet dignity was all he needed to carry forward. The world still had so much to fix. He knew racism, abuse of power, and inequality were battles that weren't solved in a week or a year. They were slow, relentless wars. But Samuel had learned something crucial. Change doesn't come from a single victory. It comes from countless quiet moments when you choose to stand tall, despite everything telling you to fall. And that was how it would continue, one small, powerful step at a time. Samuel returned to his life at Sheffard Medical Center, where he continued his work with the same passion, the same commitment to the people around him. But there was a new sense of purpose, a quiet strength that everyone could feel. When people looked at him, they didn't just see a nurse, they saw a man who had faced the worst and kept his integrity. They saw someone who had chosen time and time again not to break. And while the fight for fairness wasn't over, Samuel knew he had made a difference, one small moment at a time. 3 months had passed since the storm of Samuel Hayes' wrongful arrest. And, in Maplewood, life had started to settle back into its rhythm. But the echoes of that night were still felt. Samuel hadn't been looking for a legacy, but the quiet strength he showed had made a lasting impact. It wasn't just the police department that had changed, it was the people of the town. They'd seen something they hadn't expected. A man who refused to be broken, even when the system tried to crush him. At Sheffard Medical Center, Samuel's colleagues noticed a change in him, though he never talked about the events that had transpired. There was an extra weight to his steps, a quiet confidence that only came after someone had been tested in ways others couldn't understand. He'd become a kind of silent beacon to those around him, whether it was a nurse in the break room feeling overlooked, or a patient who was fighting a battle of their own. Samuel was always there, steady, unyielding. But despite the growing respect, Samuel still didn't speak out about the incident. He had made his statement with his actions, with the way he stood tall when everyone else wanted to sit down. He knew that the fight for fairness, for equality, was long and didn't come with a clear finish line. Racism and the abuse of power were still pervasive forces, not just in Maplewood but in every corner of society. But he also knew this: the change he sparked couldn't be measured by headlines or victories won in a court of law. It was measured in the quiet moments when someone else stood up because they saw him do it first. 3 months later, the investigation into Officer Davis and Officer Riley had reached its conclusion. Both men had been fired, their careers shattered by their actions. The police department, once resistant to change, was now in the middle of a transformation, pushing forward new policies, new trainings, and a new commitment to accountability. Samuel's story was used in every session, in every meeting, as an example of what happens when you let arrogance and bias cloud your judgment. His voice had been loud, not because he shouted, but because it was steady, calm, and unshakable. But even as the town began to change, even as people started to feel a sense of hope that maybe things could be different, Samuel remained humble. His focus never wavered from what mattered most: his work, his family, his community. He didn't need the world's recognition to know he had done something important. The respect he demanded wasn't given, it was earned in the way he lived his life every day. And that was enough for him. Still, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. And maybe, just maybe, the steps he had taken could inspire others to keep fighting, keep pushing for change. The road was long, but Samuel knew that with every small act of defiance against injustice, every quiet moment of dignity defended, the world moved one step closer to the future they all deserved. And as long as he kept moving, he knew that change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Samuel Hayes' journey isn't just a story of one man's struggle. It's a message for all of us. In a world that often tries to tear us down, Samuel showed us that the most powerful victories come from within. It's about standing tall, even when others try to force you to bow. His story reminds us that we don't need to scream or shout to make a difference. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is to stand silently with our heads held high, knowing our worth, no matter what anyone else thinks. Samuel's strength wasn't in how loud he could be, it was in how quiet he could remain, how steady he could stand, even when the world seemed to collapse around him. As we look at his journey, we must ask ourselves, when will we end the cycle of discrimination? When will we finally live in a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect? The fight for equality is far from over, but every time someone stands up, every time someone holds on to their dignity like Samuel did, we move a little closer. Samuel didn't just defend his own dignity, he gave us all the courage to do the same. His story is a call to action. Stand tall, keep fighting, and never let anyone else define your worth. Because when we defend our dignity, we defend everyone's. Note: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.